Hi, in this video I'm going to take you through the steps of drawing a lighthouse on a seascape. It's easier than you think. For this tutorial you're going to need a piece of paper, a pencil, and if you're going to be colouring in with me, some pencil crayons. Let's get started. So for this drawing I'm going to be using a felt tip pen so that it's nice and easy for you to see what I'm drawing as I draw it. But you can use your pencil until you're happy that you've gotten it right. What we're going to start by doing is the lighthouse. That's the main thing in our picture, the focal point. We're going to draw the lighthouse a third of the way across the page, and that's because it always looks more pleasing to people's eyes when the focal point is on the third line. Drawing the tower for our lighthouse. It should be wider at the bottom and the lines should get closer together as you get to the top. I'm going to draw a slightly rounded line at the top of my lighthouse, and then we've got two diagonal lines going out from each of those corners. This is going to be the little viewing deck at the top of the lighthouse. Again, a slightly rounded line, and now we've got the railing for our deck. I've drawn the lines on each side of this, and now I'm going to draw the top of the railing and then draw each of the rails. What I've done is started in the center, divided it in half, then divide it into quarters, and then go in between each of those. That just makes sure that you have nice evenly spaced lines. From there we've got the light of our lighthouse. When you draw this line, be aware that it shouldn't be wider than the bottom base of the lighthouse. So make sure that you keep those lines within the width of the lighthouse. And then we've got the little roof, which is triangular. Should be a slight overhang here. And then we can just see the top of the light from the lighthouse. The rest of it is hidden behind the railing. Down the side of our lighthouse, we're going to have those skinny little windows. They're like long, thin rectangles, and they should be in line with each other. You can draw about two of them going down. Draw a little windowsill at the bottom. And then in line with those, I'm just going to draw the door at the bottom of my lighthouse. Now we can start with the grass around the bottom of the lighthouse. So just to make it a little bit interesting, I've added little hills and mounds. So you can almost draw the mound like a U shape, a flattened U. So we've got one on each side of the lighthouse, and then maybe one that's slightly higher above it. To keep it looking realistic, make each one a slightly different height. If there's three little hills that are exactly the same height, it doesn't look right, or it doesn't look realistic. It's too symmetrical. Okay, you might need to bring the lines at the bottom of your lighthouse down. Now some lighthouses have those red stripes on them, so you can decide, you can do just a plain white lighthouse or you can add your stripes. If you do decide to add the stripes, make them a slightly curved line, and that's going to make the building look round. So a straight line will make the building look flat, and a curve, just a little bit of a curve, is going to make the building look round. Can probably squeeze another one in there. Do your best to make them equal distances apart. Right, I'm going to carry on with my round now. So I'm going to take it just past halfway across the page, and then I'm going to draw the coastline. A good trick for drawing the coastline is to make an S shape. So it should have a nice sharp point, and then just curve it back in an S. And if you can get it to come back to where the lighthouse is, that could probably look quite nice. It will balance the picture out. Then we just need a nice straight line for the sea. If you wanted to, you could add a beach in. Just draw another S that's follows the S that you've just drawn. They don't have to be perfectly parallel because beaches aren't perfectly the same width across. They have little bays. And I'm just going to draw another little mound or hill here to add some interest. If you wanted to, you could draw a little path coming from the lighthouse, some rocks. It's up to you to add the details that you would like. I'm going to add a few seagulls on this side of the page just because it's looking really empty and dull up here. And I'm just doing those ones that look like M's. So if you think of a flattened out M, and then just add a little bit of a circle for the gull's body here. And I'm going to add a little bit of shading into each of the wings to make it look a little bit more realistic. I don't know if you ever did that as a child, those little M birds. If you do this, so you make the one M much bigger than the other one, it's going to make it look like the bird's flying at an angle. So you can again just make his body a bit thicker, add a little bit of shading under the wing. So that's a way to elevate your M birds, is to just add a little bit of shading onto them. The other thing is to make them slightly different sizes and give them different angles so that it looks like birds flying. And there we have a simple drawing of a lighthouse. Stay tuned if you'd like to see how we're going to colour this in with pencil crayons. We're going to be using pencil crayons today and looking at a couple of different techniques that you can use. Now I've got myself a picture of my lighthouse drawn in pencil because the big thick black outlines wouldn't look as nice on the pencil crayon drawing. Let's start with something simple and easy. We're going to colour in the stripes on the lighthouse. So I'm going to get my red pencil crayon and I'm going to start on the edge of the building, pressing really hard, and as I get to the middle I'm just going to press lighter and lighter. So that's how you can get lighter shading. If you press hard and draw your lines close together, it will be really dark. And if you press lighter and draw your lines further apart, you'll create a lighter tone. What we want is for each side of the building to have darker shading and for the middle of it to have lighter shading. What I'm doing now is just outlining the edges to make it a nice clean line. By making darker shading on either end, it makes the building look more three-dimensional. Right, so I'm going to go to my next stripe now. Pressing really hard and lighter as I get into the middle. If you're finding that the texture of your table is coming through and you can see it in your colouring, just get a book or a couple of pieces of paper and press on them, and it will make your colouring look a lot smoother. Try and follow the pattern that you used above, so where you kind of ended your dark shading in the first line, make sure that you ended in the same spot so that there's continuity. Right, then we're just going to neaten it up. Right, and I've got one more stripe. You might have a different number of stripes depending on how you drew your picture. Right, what we're going to do next is shade in the white lines. Now this might sound funny because we want it to look white, but we can use colors like black, brown and gray to add shading in to show a darker shade of the white. So we're going to do this really lightly, and in fact I'm going to go over the whole edge of the lighthouse, so there's going to be a little bit of black shading in the red as well. Okay, you can see it's just a small amount, really light little lines. Rather draw the line too light and go over it a few times than draw a really hard line that you can't fix or it messes up your picture. Okay, the next tip is turn your page so that your hand is comfortable. So I've flipped my page right around so that my hand is nice and comfortable, especially for this shading that's a little bit scary or tricky. You want your hand to be in the most comfortable position as possible, and that will make you draw better. Okay, now we could just leave it like this if we wanted to, but the more colors you add to a picture, the more depth it has and the richer it looks. So I'm going to just take a little bit of my brown, and actually I'm going to swap to my lighter brown just so that it's a bit warmer. And this is going to give your picture just a little bit of warmth. The other thing you can do with your brown is just go on the edge of the window. I've just made an L on the left hand side and the bottom of shading with it. Okay, now what we're going to do is at the top of the lighthouse here, there's going to be shadow because this little view deck, it sticks out over the tower. So we need to do a little bit of shading at the top of the lighthouse. I'm going to get my black, add a little bit more black. And you can press quite hard on that actual little line. There's going to be a lot of shadow there. Next, we're going to color in the windows. Now, we're quite far away, and these are small windows, so you can just color them in black. And the little windowsill, I'm just going to give it a little outline. You might want to take your light brown, just do a little bit of coloring over that windowsill. I'm just doing it on the left-hand corner so that there's still light on it. After doing this, I think I'm going to add a little bit darker shading around the edges just so that it ties together. You can't have really dark shading on the inside and then light shading everywhere else. But this is what pencil coloring is about. It's lots of layers of coloring going back again and again until it's right. Okay, let's shade in this little viewing deck now. It's also going to be in quite a bit of shadow because it's fanning out, so the sun's not going to hit the underneath part of it. Okay, you'll have a bit of darker shading at the ends, slightly lighter in the middle. Add a little bit of brown in just to make it a bit richer. Right, and then we're going to do our railing. I'm pressing quite hard over the lines of the railing so that they stand out nicely. It's quite a fine detail, and if you press too lightly, it can look a little bit messy. Okay, let's go along the railing. You could add a little bit of shading onto the railing if you wanted to. Then the building at the top. Just adding an outline and then doing some lighter shading as I get in. And we're going to colour in the light of our lighthouse. I'm just using my light brown to do some light colouring first. So I've pressed lightly and left a couple of spaces in between it, and I'm going to go over it with my yellow. That's going to fill in the extra space that's there. If you press hard with a pencil crayon, you don't leave space on the page for more colour to be added to it. So if you want to layer up colours and add a few different colours, you need to press lightly. If you press too hard, there's not going to be space for any other colours on the page. Okay, we're going to do the little roof of the lighthouse next. I'm going to make the light come from the left-hand side, so I'm just going to do a bit of dark shading, or more dark shading on this left-hand side, sorry, and then just a little bit on the right-hand side. I've also added in a few lines to create the texture of the roof. And again, I'm going to go with my brown, just add a few. Right, finally we're going to do our door. Again, like our windows, it's going to be quite dark. And I'm going to make the left-hand side darker than the right-hand side. A little bit of our brown. I've left some space between the black so that we could add a bit of brown to it. And there's some railings at the bottom, or a rail at the bottom, so I'm just going to add in the lines for that and a bit of light colouring. Go again with my black. If you would prefer, you could just leave the bottom part white as well, if you think that you don't like the look of the railing at the bottom. Now, it's kind of looking like the top of our lighthouse is just hovering over the railing. So what we're going to do is just bring these lines down and do a little bit of light colouring with our black and our grey over this area. We don't want to add too many details and distract the person's eye from the railing. But we don't want it to look like the top of the lighthouse is just hanging above the railing. So just a bit of light colouring in that area. Okay, our lighthouse is done. Let's get started with all this greenery at the bottom now. To colour this in, you're going to need a dark green to start with. Now, when I'm shading pencil crayons, I like to always start with the darkest colour and work my way to the lighter colours. Right, so what we're going to do with our darkest green is kind of do an outline, but you don't want to do this big fat line outlining it. I want you to almost scribble, and that's going to make people think of foliage. So don't draw one solid line, make it a bit of a scribble. And because we made things lighter on the right-hand side on the lighthouse, we're going to make the right-hand side of each of these little mounds slightly lighter than the left-hand side. So if you decide to make one part of your picture lighter, you need to continue it in the whole picture. Okay, and what I'm doing now is just pressing lighter and lighter with my little green scribbles. When you press harder, you leave less space for other colors, and then as you press lighter, then there's more space for the other colors to join in. Okay, let's go on to this mound. Left-hand side of the mound gets lots of scribbles. Okay, I've made a little mound in the front here. If you don't make one in the front, that's just a lot of space to have to color in one color. So adding another little mound will make your shading easier. You could add more if you wanted to. So you can see I'm literally just scribbling. The horizon's always a little bit darker, so I'm also going to do some darker shading there. When you make the horizon darker, you make it look further away. So lighter colors look closer and darker colors look further. So it's always a good idea to do some dark shading on your horizon. Right, what I'm taking next is my light green. And I'm just going to go over these hills. Again, pressing quite dark on the left-hand side of each little mound. As I get to the bottom of these little mounds, I'm doing some lighter shading so that I have space to add in more colors. So the more colors you add in, the richer your picture will look. If you just color something in one color, it can look quite flat and bland. So you can see I've left some white here, and that's because we're going to do little bits of beach sand in between the foliage or greenery. So for that, I'm going to use a nice light brown and a yellow. Now the yellow works really well because yellow and blue make green, so it's kind of part of green. So when you color over the green with the yellow, it blends in really easily. So what I'm doing is just going over the lighter side of my mound, the right-hand side, with the yellow, and I'm pressing really hard so I can get into any of those little spots of white that didn't get the green on them. Just adds a little bit of yellow into the green, and it will help blend the brown into the green. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of brown, and in these two spots here, 2 or 3 spots, I'm just going to add a little bit of the brown shading. It can look like a bit of beach sand in between the foliage. You can see I'm not scribbling anymore, and that's because the scribbling's already done its job. I'm just coloring in now and getting in all those little extra spots. Could get a little bit of dark brown and put it in a couple of spots. Adding a bit of dark brown to the bottom will tie the lighthouse and the ground together because they'll have a similar color in them, anchoring them together. Right, we can add a little beach in now if you want to. You don't have to do that. I'm going to start with my darker brown. Again, the furthest part will always be the darkest part, so pressing fairly hard with my dark brown on the horizon. I'm taking my lighter brown now, going over the darker brown. A little bit of yellow would also make it look beachy. As you are going along with your picture, always just take a minute to look at it and see how is it going. Am I happy with how it's turning out? Now if I look at mine, I think the shading is looking a little strange between the beach and the foliage. So I'm just going to look for my dark green and try and blend the dark green and the brown into each other. Right, next we're going to colour in the sea. Again, darkest colour on the horizon, so start with the darkest blue you have. And make a fairly thick line on the horizon. Now for the sand and the foliage we've been doing scribbling, but for the sea we're just going to do long straight lines so that it looks like it's a beautiful calm day on the ocean. Obviously if you wanted it to look like there was a big storm, you could do more of the scribbling and have a bit of white in it, but if you want it to look nice and calm, just do long lines as you're colouring. So I've done quite a thick line as my horizon, and now I'm going to slowly start shading lighter. Pressing lighter and making my lines further apart. Just remember with pencil crayons, rather press lightly and go over it 3 or 4 times, then press too hard. It's all about adding layers of colour. I'm adding some light blue over it now. Maybe near the shoreline you want to leave a little bit of it white so that it looks like the foam of a wave hitting the beach. So you can see here the lines of the desk that I'm pressing on are coming through. So what I'm going to do is just get a book to press on so that I can get that colouring nice and smooth. It wasn't bothering me so much here where I was doing scribbling. Do you see how much smoother it can look when you're pressing on a really flat surface? Okay, just going to go in with another blue because I have 3 blues. So if you have 4 blues in your set of pencil crayons, use all 4 blues. If you only have 2, then use 2. Just going to neaten up the colouring at the end here. Another option is to trim your picture when you're done so that it gets a nice clean edge. Okay, just once you finish colouring, make sure that that horizon is still looking darker. Give the illusion of distance. And then I'm just going to finish off by doing my 3 seagulls, and I'm just going to do them with my black pencil crayon. Remember, those are the flat M's. And there is our pencil crayon lighthouse. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if this is your first time watching a Get Started video, why not subscribe? We have tons of great ideas that go up every week. And finally, if you have any questions about shading with pencil crayons, please leave questions in the comments below.